welcome to Brand Retro. Today we're going to talk about something that's it's a passion project and something that's a little near and dear to my heart, and it's DogDayz Apparel. I brought in Marisa again to have a discussion about this and also talk a little bit about what all went into this. So the intention with bringing in Marisa is to, just kind of have somebody to play off. Because to be honest, this is a passion project of my own. I'm very close to it. And I think that, there's just some things about the brand building process when you're too close to it or you're part of that construction phase. You just kind of forget about the little nuances and the reasons why you do certain things or how it got to a certain point in the process that actually, helps layer in and build those foundations of the brand. So Marisa is gonna join me here and talk with me a little bit about, the backstory behind DogDayz Apparel, where it came from and kind of, the reason why I'm passionate about it and the reason why I continue to, kind of grow that alongside of CyberDogs and kind of what goes all into that. So this is a fun one, so please listen in and enjoy.
Well, thank you, Mike, for doing this interview with me about DogDayz Apparel. I'm excited to learn more because I've heard just bits about the story and some of your passion behind the project and the small town pride and the mascot design. So to start, can you just share a little bit of what was that origin story? How did you come up with the concept for DogDayz Apparel?
Kind of like every guy in his life kind of wants to own a bar. It's just one of those things like we all kind of think we need to do in our lives. When you're a graphic artist or a designer, you want to create stuff that's yours. And a lot of people come up with the idea of they want to do apparel or clothing or something like that. And it wasn't all that different for me. But what was different about it is I always wanted to create, kind of the retro apparel or do something that, not only was unique, but connected back to some kind of a memory or something that, maybe meant something to me. So I think back to when I was a kid, whether it was, a mascot tee for our local, teams or whatever, or maybe it was a really cool, like Return of the Jedi, like baseball looking tee that I had when I was a kid, anything like that, where it's like, man, I wish I still had that shirt. Not that it would still fit or anything like that, but you just kind of didn't, pay that much attention to it, or you didn't really cherish it maybe like you thought maybe you should have or could have. And now that you don't have it anymore, it's like, man, I wish I still had that. So being a graphic artist and being somebody who's got the means to create, it's like, well, I don't necessarily have to wish I had those things. I can just make them. So it's always been kind of one of those ideas that's floated around and been something I wanted to do. And as an entrepreneur and as a creative, once I started my own business and kind of had this, let's just try it, let's just make it come to life kind of an attitude, it just seemed like the time was right. So when I first started CyberDogs, I had kind of committed to myself, like, hey, I'm going to do this DogDayz thing too. I just don't know when, but I'm going to think about it. And it was something that was always on the plate, and I brainstormed it, and I drew up, website plans, and I did all kinds of little different things throughout the first couple of years of CyberDogs, and never quite took action though. So at the end of my second year, I just decided, like, I've done enough thinking, I've done enough talking, I've done enough brainstorming. I need to just build it, get it up and running, and just see what it looks like and see where it goes from there. At that point, the concept wasn't even that flushed out. It was more just the idea of creating an apparel line and just doing something with fun, creative designs. And what kind of took me to the place of wanting to do it was the idea of, going back home. I don't know if you're from a small town, but being from a small town, when you go back home, the conversation quickly begins and starts and ends with all these memories of, hey, remember that one time or that one party or that one basketball game? Or, a lot of the conversation is stemmed around these memories. And I've always, picked up on this vibe that when you go back and you talk to your friends, or you go back to the small town and run into these people that you don't see very often, when the conversation is that, it's very positive. It's very, uplifting. It's fun. Everybody's laughing and kind of reminiscing about these good times. And then there's this other side of the conversation that's like, man, nothing ever happens here. Yeah, we're not growing. It's kind of, I don't want to say negative, but it's a lot more of a melancholy mindset of, being a small town and being, kind of feeling like you're not growing, to feeling like you're not necessarily doing what you want to do. So it's like these two sides of the coin, but I definitely picked up on the fact that when we're talking about the good times, the memories, the nostalgia, the conversation was different. It was just, and everybody got involved, and you could see people, kind of feeding off that. And what was kind of interesting, or how I at least prove the theory to myself, is when I decided to do this, the first shirt I created was a Twin Valley Tigers t-shirt, which is where I went to school. We were the Twin Valley Tigers, and then we merged with a local town and became Norman County East, and then that eventually changed. And through those school consolidations and through those mergers with other town, I felt the firsthand experience of transitioning from a Twin Valley Tiger to a Norman County East Eagle, and feeling like a little bit of the legacy had been lost. Maybe some of the accomplishments as a Tiger, so to speak, were somewhat diminished now because we moved into this new phase. So having experienced that, I went back to the beginning of, when I was a kid, I was a Twin Valley Tiger. So that's the first shirt I created, was a retro Twin Valley Tigers t-shirt. And it took a little bit to get it all pulled together, but I got it pulled together in time for my local town festival. So if you're from small town USA, you know that there's that one time a year where you have that little town festival, and you have a couple food trucks, maybe a car show, street dance, that kind of a thing. So I got this shirt done and completed in time for that town festival. And my full on intent was, it was to wear it back and not say anything, to not call mention to it, to not draw any attention to the shirt itself. I just wanted to wear it and just experience the reaction of, what people might say, think, or otherwise. And I wore that shirt the entire day. I wore it up to the bar that night. And inside of, 5 or 6 hours that I had spent back home with my family, friends, and, people I hadn't seen in a long time, I had over 35 people point that shirt out to me and say, "Oh my God, where did you get that?" Or "Did you save that?" Or "Remember that one time?" Like, the shirt itself created 35 interactions, 35 plus interactions with people that I don't know that otherwise would have happened. I mean, they might have in some form or fashion, but probably not in the same way, where it stemmed off of that shirt. And it was, it was retro inspired enough from like what I remember of like the Twin Valley Tigers t-shirts, that I think most people probably thought it was a really old shirt. And I didn't necessarily get into the, hey, I made this shirt, or like, I didn't really give them the backstory, because I was just trying to get a feel for whether or not something like that had a place, if it had a place in the market, and or if it had, any kind of legs at all from a sales perspective. And what I found was that, yeah, not only did it create some excitement, but it also created some pretty optimistic discussion, and it created like this um this infused memory process, that where people were talking about the good times and all this other stuff. So it was really cool. And after that test, so to speak, it was just kind of like, I need to do this. So the idea kind of came alive after that test. And that's when I sat down and started actually doing the research, within a 30-40 mile radius of my hometown, and just, not limited to, but just sticking to what I knew at the beginning, to try to flush out those within my same area that could potentially be a really cool t-shirt idea. So that's kind of where it started, and that's kind of where it grew legs. So
That's awesome. I love that story about the Twin Valley Tigers, and I'm sure it was just cool. Like, if I saw my was that high school, or which grade was that the
Yeah,
Tigers?
so well, we started merging. So my brother, I have two older brothers, but my oldest brother is 9 years older than me. So like I remember first going to basketball games, football games, whatnot, when everything was Twin Valley Tigers. But
Okay.
my middle brother and I got into, junior high, we had already started to merge. So we had merged in track, merged in football, not basketball yet, but it slowly was already starting to happen.
Gotcha.
I was probably 14, 15 when the merger started. And I remember it being a really big deal because nobody wanted to merge. Like there was so much rivalry and so much independence as towns and as legacy, nobody wanted to necessarily like partner with the enemy. Not that they were
Mhm.
the enemy, but there was so much competitiveness. It was weird. It was different. And I remember people talking about it. I remember people talking about the school board meetings and, all this crazy stuff. And, at the end of the day, they literally had no choice. I mean, with enrollment and whatever else was going on, it was something that was inevitable, but we acted like it wasn't.
Yeah, and that's something maybe you could just quick explain why that happens because I was not familiar with that until living out in and meeting more people from small towns, but that's fairly common, like you were saying, that two schools from smaller communities will merge to build enrollment, right?
Yeah, it basically comes down to enrollment and money and stuff like that. So like it takes so many dollars to operate a school, to operate a district and employ the teachers and all these different things. And obviously some of that's offset by taxpayer money and federal and state grants and those kinds of things. Where when the enrollment gets down to a certain point, you just kind of hit a break even point of I don't know if we can sustain this if we don't get more kids in the school or if we don't get more kids in sports, if we don't, there were schools around us that couldn't even put together a football team because they didn't have enough kids to play or enough kids that wanted to play. So when you start to take the money into consideration and then just the overall opportunity of, having more kids and more resources at your disposal, um, it just becomes kind of a no-brainer. I mean, it'd be nice if we could all just, stay independent, but I get it, when
Yeah.
these towns started to kind of, I don't want to say shrink, but they stopped growing to some degree. It just got harder and harder. So to give the kids and the school district more opportunity and more availability from a resources perspective, I mean, they had to merge and they had to partner up with um, probably, their arch rivals in some ways.
Yeah, it's so interesting because yeah, there is a bit of that independence lost in the process. Doing your research, you said you started with a 30 to 40-mile radius. How did you go about that? What were some of the things you were looking for?
Well, there's a part of it where, I mean, I was aware of some of them because of either the school name, like it would be a hyphenated school name, or I remember when they had merged. I mean, so there was a part of it that was obvious to me because I'd kind of lived through it. So I'd started there, but then I started to go back further and say, well, what were they before then? So if they're the Ulen Hitterdall Spartans today, what was Ulen before that and what was Hitterdall before that? So then I'd go one step backwards and able to come up with three different designs from one piece of research. Then, we just kept going further and further. But then the other thing that we did is we would try to find little factoids and little details about the school and the legacy of, so that when we wrote the copy or designed the logos that we could build those intricacies into. So like when people come to our like mascot category, when you read the description of the Twin Valley Tigers or the Norman County East Eagles or whatever it is, if you're from there, you're going to pick up on the little details of, nestled off Highway 32 or these different things that are like, oh my God, like they nailed it as far as like the description goes. And we did that so that we would cater to and play towards those who remember, or those who are familiar with. And then the backside of it is that, hey, if let's just say you've never been to Minnesota and you don't care either way, it's just a cool retro t-shirt. So we kind of play both sides of the fence, but we lead with that legacy and that restoration of mindset kind of piece, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm sure that just from my experience even being there, when you have any kind of familiarity with someone's small town, like, "Oh, yeah, I know it. I've been there," or, "I went to the gas station," or, "I went to that, one Dairy Queen," and people go, "Oh, yeah." It just builds this trust and a positive connection like you were saying.
Well, and
Uh,
there's a nostalgia piece too, where I think, I mean, even if you grew up somewhere else, if you knew your dad or your grandma or grandpa or whatever it was, if you knew that they were from a certain small town, there's a nostalgia piece where it's like, I want that shirt because that's where my dad went to school or whatever it
mhm.
is. Like, there's layers to it that I think you don't necessarily have to be the graduate of what that school or that mascot was at the time. You just have to be somewhat connected to it and appreciate, kind of the nostalgia mindset. And to be honest, I mean, if you go to Abercrombie and Fitch, you go to Target, you go to pretty much any retail store, you'll find retro tees.
Mhm.
So the concept of retro tees is like, it's not a new concept, but to layer in this legacy and to actually make it like retro authentic is that's different. That's new. That's something that I think that, people can get behind. And the idea is that if they have that memory, it's going to be that much more of a no brainer for them to want that shirt or sweatshirt or whatever it is.
So just a little behind the name, can you talk about how any insight behind the name Dog Days Apparel? How did you come up with that?
Yeah. So the name, I just wanted the name to mean something and have it be, directly pointing to and connecting back to this retro mindset. Because I've been approached a lot with you should do X, Y, and Z on dog days. And it's like there's certain criteria that have to fit. The first is the school or the mascot or the business or whatever it is that we're trying to recreate. It needs to no longer exist because I don't want to compete with, I don't want to get in any branding or trademarking issues with an existing company or school or logo and to me it tells a better story when it's gone, because we don't always necessarily appreciate things until they're gone. So like you always hear these stories of people that, yeah, when I grew up, we used to go to the ice cream shop and then it burnt down or it was tore down, or there's always like this story of loss or this story of, I can't get there anymore. I can't actually experience that anymore. So that's kind of the power of why we recreate these. So that's one of the criteria. And the other thing is that everything that we're creating either needs to be kind of brand or apparel neutral and or retro. So like crew neck sweatshirts, kind of your general retro type tees. Like we're not necessarily following any current fashion trends because those fashion trends didn't exist in the 80s and the 90s. So we're trying to really stick to this palette of what you could have found back then when this stuff was accessible to you. So even like something as silly as even a crew neck sweatshirt. When I first started designing crew neck sweatshirts and whatnot for Dog Days, I mean, maybe they existed somewhere, but I didn't really see them advertised or see them anywhere in any fashion magazines or anything like that at that time. And now here we are 2.5, 3 years later, and now you're seeing crew neck sweatshirts everywhere. So somewhere along the line, like these things cycle back around, but I'm really specific to find those that are kind of retro authentic to that time frame. So the name to your question was something that was super important that we wanted to tie back to a retro feel. And originally it was going to be Glory Days was the name because it fit obviously, and I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan, so that's cool. And we had all these reasons why it fit, but because of some trademarking issues and some different things that I wanted it to be positioned for the long term. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to transition away from Glory Days as the main name and use that as a sub brand, and then change the tip of the umbrella, so to speak, for the brand to be DogDayz Apparel. And where that comes from is that dog days of summer, that those memories of going down to the swimming hole or riding your bike with your friends or staying out too late playing basketball or whatever it was. But it's kind of that longest day of the year, the dog days of summer kind of a mindset. So that's where we started, and that's where we kind of transitioned to, but always keeping that retro authentic mindset in check along the way, because there's a lot of retro apparel t-shirt companies out there. I mean, obviously you can find them all over Etsy and whatnot. And the difference between us and them is that obviously I hope we have a better quality, but like our designs are far more superior in my opinion. And we also have that vibe that goes with it, which is pretty cool. So
Right, you have a real story behind it, which I think is it's one thing to just be like, "Hey, here's a cool looking mascot on a retro looking tee," and it's another thing to be like, "This is a high school that merged and this mascot doesn't exist, but it has so much power in that."
yeah,
Um, the memories of it, especially if you went there or knew someone or had parents or grandparents, like you said. I think
yeah.
that's so cool.
Yeah, and what's cool about it too is that the designs and the different things that we create for this they're not. So we'll research and we'll find whatever we can, whether it's an old yearbook photo or whatever, but we'll try to find something to work off of from an inspiration standpoint, so that we knew in some ways whether the mascot was more cartoony looking versus realistic versus. But we try to basically take that concept and replicate, not duplicate, and make it better. So all the designs are not only custom, but they're designed in a way that hopefully makes you feel like it's from that era. And what's cool about it, and what we've actually had happen, is we've had so many people that actually either buy our shirts or see our stuff that go, "Oh my god, it's exactly like I remember." Which I love, because that means we hit the nail on the head. But what's so cool about it is that it worked, because none of them are like they remember. Every one of them is custom built from scratch, and almost has this next level twist on it. So I know that like they're not exactly like they remembered, but their memory says it is, which is that's perfect. That's what we wanted.
So why is that? And you're from a small town, and there does seem to be kind of like you said, people are leaving them, or sometimes you get this feeling of there's nothing to do here. We got to get out. Can't wait to get out. But there is still always that connection of home to the place that you grew up. Why is preserving some of that small town pride important?
For me personally, I grew up in a small town, and hearing time and time again that small towns are dying and small towns are drying up and there's no opportunity here. And like, I think people have been telling small towns that they're not going to make it for so long that they actually started to believe it.
Mm.
And the reality is that in between the big towns, there's miles and miles of highway, and there's there's always got to be a place to stop and go to the bathroom, buy a pop, get gas, whatever. Although I do think it's hard for small towns to thrive like they once did, or thrive to the point of some of these larger cities, the idea that they're drying up and dying isn't real either. It just means their ceiling is a little lower, and their sustainability maybe gets a little bit more difficult, but they still can sustain, they still can thrive to some degree. And I think what's kind of sad about it is that too many people drank the Kool-Aid that there was no hope, and they just stopped trying. So that's what's interesting, because like, I won't name names, but like when you go around my home base area, there are some towns that are oozing with community pride that never drank that Kool-Aid. And then there's other towns that, you know, put the plywood up on all the windows on Main Street the first time, they just gave up. So I think I just think there's a mix of, people and mindsets and belief out there as to whether or not they can sustain that level anymore. And it's different for every town, and it's probably different depending on who you have to help sustain it and volunteer for certain projects and support and all those different things. But there is always going to be this part where that town's going to exist on some level, because it's right off the highway, or it's right off. So I mean, like, it's not a death sentence, I guess is what I'm saying. So So how do you take the situation of it being what it is and still maximize your potential and still thrive at whatever capacity you can still thrive.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the mindset affects so much of it, which I think from living in Fargo Moorhead, you see that with Fargo's story of just how Main Street was, or Broadway was, kind of a sketchier place to be. And there was kind of this mindset shift of people investing and being more energetic about it. And now it's like thriving, you know?
Yeah, well,
So
it's the
it's,
same. Yeah, it's the same with even the surrounding areas. The
mhm.
Whether it's Moorhead or West Fargo or Horace or these areas that decided that we have our own opportunity. We don't have to wait for the bigger city to help us out or to get there. If we just kind of carve our own path and put our own efforts into this, we can continue to kind of move the line and be successful in our own right. And I think that's the part that, I think got lost in all this. And I, in defense of the small towns too, I think there was a time and a place where they just didn't know. I mean, they were just told that's it, like everybody was moving out and circumstances being what they were. I think it just they just read the writing on the wall and they just reacted to it the way they knew how. Well, a lot of years have passed and these towns are still here. The gas station's still running and there's still new tar getting put down every couple of years in front of it. And they're still here. So to kind of bring back some of that positivity and that mindset, that's the goal.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are some of the, I know you've mentioned before, some of the giving back and just ways that you are using DogDayz Apparel to build hope like that? Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean it's a work in progress because there's been a long time and a lot of hours invested in building the brand and the mission and the why and kind of getting that story out there. Because one of the curse and the blessings of this whole thing is that out of the gate, yeah, it's a unique idea and it's kind of fun and kind of cool, but we were instantly painted with that brush of, oh, another t-shirt company, another whatever. So you got to kind of fight through that and overcome that initial reputation as just another t-shirt company. Then you have to build up some momentum and some traction and potentially generate that into sales, because without the sales you can't necessarily do anything and grow the business the way you want it to. And my goal has always been that, like, I want to grow it to the point where it's profitable so that it pays for itself, but I also want to grow it to the point where it's profitable so I can take the profits and do stuff with it, like donating it to a small town, creating a grant foundation where, maybe a small town can apply for the grant to restore the old movie theater, the old bowling alley. Maybe it's new streetlights, maybe it's a new community garden, whatever it is. But you can't necessarily get to that point until you generate sales and you generate the hype and the traction that goes with it. So we've been working really hard at not only getting the word out there of what the story is and what the purpose is behind DogDayz, but also to um, get the engine running the way it needs to generate sales so that we can eventually then use that money to do some good for small towns. I would say more locally and close to home, we've had a couple opportunities to, do some sales promotions and do some different things to generate sales, and then take those profits and donate them to a family in need or somebody that's, down on their luck. We had one of the people that inspired one of our favorite teas in the whole landmark collection. We found out that individual was diagnosed with cancer. Just because it kind of felt like the right thing to do, reached out to his family and just said, hey, if you want to, push the sales of this shirt and kind of get this shirt out there for Dale was his name. But if you want to get that out there for Dale in support of, we'll donate all the profits to your family. So we were able to do, something like that, it just, it was kind of cool to be able to help out in that capacity. But at the same time, it fed the purpose, it fed the story, because that's why we're doing this in the first place. So
Yeah, that's so cool. And it's kind of a win-win because you have this cool product that you're creating that people can get behind. Then there's also this like a giving back portion to it. It just adds to the overall experience, you know.
Yeah, because a lot of the designs and, big picture, I need to get kind of the engine running and get collecting these memories and these concepts from more people than just myself. Which we have some, but most of them are coming from my own memories and whatnot. And
Mhm.
in that case of, like the shirt I just explained, that shirt was completely created and inspired by one individual from my memories of him or my experiences with him. So to be able to kind of give it back to him and say thanks was kind of cool because the shirt wouldn't even exist if not him being part of my childhood and having experienced some of the different things that I had with him. So
It's always cool to have something named or created after you, you know, shirt or
yeah,
design.
and unfortunately, I never like we've been so busy working on getting the engine and the machine built and the designs done. I never really got to run into him either and kind of get his thoughts on it. And to be honest, I'm sure he knew it existed at the end. He recently passed, but I'm sure he knew it existed at the end, but I would have been curious to hear his thoughts as to what he thought of it because if you looked
Yeah.
at it, I mean, he would definitely pick up on his inspiration, but other than that, most people would just look at it and think it's kind of a cool retro gas station T-shirt. So
Right. It's like the when you know mentality, you know?
exactly, exactly.
So just to wrap up, what are some exciting things that are coming up for Dog Days Apparel or any dreams for the future that you can share with us?
I think the goal here in the next, at least to finish out 2020 is to just get more exposure out there and to share more of those stories. 2019 was a big year for just getting the new website launched, getting the expanded categories built out from landmarks to mascots to lake, all that different stuff. So to get a big body of work out there to continue to grow it from was kind of 2019. And this year it's about getting that exposure out there so we can get more sales and do more good with it. Long term, there's no reason why this couldn't be a national crusade as far as like finding little towns in Texas or Nebraska or whatever it is, because they exist everywhere. But to do that, it's just time and research and getting those stories. We have a form on the website where, and we've actually some of the collection that's out there now is based off of this, but we have a form on the website that solicits those ideas. So if you're from a small town and your mascot or your landmark or whatever it is no longer exists, we have a form out there where you can fill it out and supply us at least the starter information for us to go research it. And then, yeah, we'll create a custom design based on that so that, if your school or your mascot is no more, we can bring it back to life.
That is really cool. And what do you are there is there any kind of fee for doing that, or
Not at
is it
this
just kind of your
time.
discretion?
Not at this time because we're just thankful, we're thankful for the involvement and we're thankful for just more ideas.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, there's a ton of them out there and I could research till the cows come home and probably come up with hundreds more, but it's better to get it from the brand lover, from the audience. So
Mhm.
like if they come back and I could probably point them out to you, but we've got some really unique ones out there that I never would have found. I never would have probably thought of it, but because some of these people from Western North Dakota and whatnot have a better feel for what once was. Getting that information from them gave me enough to build off of. So like just some really cool, unique stuff. And I think about, North Dakota's big too, but like I think about like your Texas or your some of these states that are really spread out. I bet
Mhm.
there's a ton of cool ones out there.
Oh,
How much
yeah.
time can you invest in research? I don't know, but getting it from them is I don't know. It just feels different when you get the idea from somebody else because you're kind of bringing their memory back to life and not your own, which is cool. So
Yeah. Yeah, that is cool. The one that I caught my eye too was the Audubon Zephyrs.
Yep.
Is it Zephyrs?
Yep.
That was what like, what you're saying of really unique, mascots that you would never think of. I'm like, Zephyr, but the design is so cool.
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
would wanna wear that."
If you look through some of them, there's some that are so like, you can almost tell the era that it might have came from
Oh, yeah.
because of what the mascot is, and then there's some that are kind of like, why they don't exist. Like the Devil's Lake Satans is one that I love, which, at the time, it probably wasn't a big deal,
You're
but
right.
somewhere along the line, somebody made a problem with it, and it got
I'm like,
squashed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's questionable. So now to have that's kinda cool. I mean, isn't that kinda neat? I mean, I don't know. I like that one.
Oh, yeah. It is, it's such a timepiece, and it's
Yeah,
yeah, that it's just cool and it has a story. There's a locomotive, and yeah, it's I can imagine as you branch out into different states, like, you almost get a piece of the culture, like, there's a lot of Vikings ones, there's a lot of agriculture-based designs, from the Midwest, and then I know, like, for me in California, it was Roadrunner was, my, like, elementary school you start to get kind of, like you can see a bit of where it's from, the
yeah.
concepts.
Yeah,
So cool.
and not that, like and some of them, I mean, I guess if they were modern mascots or modern logos today, they'd be borderline offensive, but because they're time stamped in a certain era and the reality is that they did once exist. So
Right.
it just kind of makes it nostalgic and kind of fun actually. But
Yeah. Do you have any more, favorite ones or ones that you would call out as, like, a fun
I
one?
think the Storm Chaser ones are pretty cool.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's a couple just that they just I don't know, they're not what you'd think of for a typical mascot. I think the ones that stand out the most to me though is I really like the landmark tees because they're businesses that no longer exist. They're all created kind of from the memory or the backstory. One of the cool ones that we did this last year was I was doing some trade work with a friend of mine who does some SEO and some different type work, and he was telling me this story about how his grandma owned a cafe out in western North Dakota, and that she was famous for her pie and her whatever 10-cent cup of coffee, and he had like this whole elaborate story of why this was such a iconic stop or why this cafe was such a big deal in his local region as a kid. And
Mhm.
I'm like, dude, we got to make a shirt about this. So send me the details and let's get going. So we
For sure.
we created a retro inspired shirt that was his grandma's cafe, and he was able to order them for his family for Christmas. And like, it was just, you created a whole experience from just trying to resurrect that memory or that logo. And now I think about, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think about the potentially dozens that we sold or gave to him and his family during Christmas time. How many of those are now being worn at family reunions or whatever the case may be? I mean, so these conversations and these, kind of this resurrecting of the memory continues to play on every time you wear it. Because
Right.
especially if you're wearing it in your in your circles where people know what it is, like that makes it even cooler. So
I know. You think of how many times someone just points out, "Oh, it's a cool sweatshirt," and he gets to tell about his grandma,
or
that's a
or
really
even
unique experience.
yeah, or even like the idea of why are you wearing a old cafe sweatshirt? You know what I mean? Because
Right.
it kind of stands out enough where it's like you kind of wonder like old, what is that? You kind of ask that question. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's pretty cool. And to your point, like you said, with like the regions, you go around here and you see the bison or even the stuff like the Redskins, the Central Redskins, the Minoman Indians, stuff like that. That's over time is being phased out because they're deeming that stuff inappropriate. But during the heyday of when those mascots were alive, that was like a huge sense of pride. Like that was people were pumped about being whatever it was that they were, whether it was a
Mhm.
tiger or a eagle or whatever it was. So I don't know, it's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
So with the landmarks one, so is that those are the 2 categories, is mascots and businesses? Or do you have
Uh,
other?
so we have a brand category that's basically the brand of Dog Days, and then we have mascot, lake, landmark, and freestyle. And mascot is essentially the mascots. So if you log into the mascot, or not log in, but you click into the mascot category,
Mhm.
we basically, like I said, not duplicated, but replicated kind of the retro look and feel of what that mascot would look like. And then we have a home and away version. So for the colorways, not only are the colors accurate to what the school would have been, but then we have a home and away version of that shirt, just like you would have had when you played sports. And then
Oh, that's awesome.
the lake category is based upon, kind of like retro resort kind of stuff. So like so many people you talk to say, yeah, my grandma and grandpa used to own a resort on whatever lake and it was called Evergreen. Or we used to go to this one place when I was a kid and spend a week in the summer at whatever. So we have a lake category that's kind of retro inspired by those resorts that no longer exist. And then the land
Oh,
Yeah, so then the landmark
yeah.
category is around businesses. So if there was a bowling alley, arcade, movie theater, cafe, whatever it is, that's what kind of qualifies as a landmark, is an old business that used to be in your hometown that no longer exists. And then the freestyle category is stuff that's just retro inspired, just for the sake of fun. So like we have a Pabst Blue Ribbon inspired logo or design that says beer dart champion. But when you look
Oh,
at it,
nice.
you can clearly tell it's like retro inspired by Pabst Blue Ribbon. So it's kind of this idea of kind of meshing like, new age concepts with retro logos and brands.
Mhm. And
So
even beer darts is such a nostalgic kinda memory too, to be like, "Oh," that would be a
yeah,
cool shirt to have
yeah.
if you were
So
a champion.
yeah, right. But yeah, just to kind of create those categories, and there are specific silos for some, but anything that I'm pretty much open to anything. If we can come up with something that's kind of nostalgic and fun and it fits, the nostalgia piece, then I'm all for it. Because like I said, I've had people ask me if I'm ever going to get almost like Under Armour type clothing, or like, am I going to get certain things that are more modern? And I'm like, no, it's always going to be the retro stuff. Like I want it to be like, even the hats, like I want a certain trucker looking hat. I want you to feel like it's 1980 when you buy our stuff.
That's good to it'll become it's recognizable, like, "Oh, that's a Dog Days. That must be from Dog Days," because it always has a similar look.
Yeah, and we're working through the kinks, but I think it's helped us kind of, I don't want to say get there faster, but it's helped us maintain a certain level of consistency by just not going too far off that road.
And people can, submit, like, for the businesses or the lake or freestyle, people can submit ideas for those as well?
Yeah, we actually have the form out there. It's right up in the main nav called Tier Request,
Okay.
and they can go out there and fill out kind of the starting details of what the conversation might look like. And then in some cases, I'll have to potentially reach out or even dig into it a little further. But we really try to qualify the accuracy of whether or not the business existed, the mascot. Unfortunately, your memories can play tricks on you. But we've even had some that were submitted and it was the wrong town with the wrong mascot, and they just didn't remember. Like
Oh, wow.
they're just like, well, I think this is what it was, and it wasn't accurate enough. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, we can't do it then because we want it to be accurate. It has to be. I want you to be able to Google that school or Google that landmark and be able to find some shred of it
Mhm.
existing, because that's the point. So
That's a good place to wrap it up. Is there anything else that you wanna add about Dog Days or final thoughts?
No, just, if you're looking for something specific, or if you have an idea of a school or a mascot, landmark, whatever that no longer exists, yeah, reach out to me. Fill out that form or check us out at dogdayzapparel.com. We're constantly evolving and growing it. And like I said, the goal is to grow it, support small towns, and to be able to give something back to kind of the source of this whole thing. So that's the idea. That's the concept.
Well, thank you, Mike,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
excited to keep following with the Dog Days story.
Marisa, thanks again for coming on and talking with me about DogDayz Apparel. And over the summer, over the remainder of 2020, just be on the lookout. We're adding new, we're adding new stuff here periodically. We're revamping a few things with the brand and trying to just make the overall customer experience even better. And that would be dogdayzapparel.com, DOGDAYZ apparel.com. Lots of fun stuff coming, and we appreciate anybody who can, kind of support us, send us ideas, and continue to be part of that experience.